brilliant performances and such a range of different conversations and different things being spoken about. And I might echo a few things that have already been said, and I also might say some things that have not been said. And I'm going to pose a series of questions in response to the panel, in response to the questions that we were given and the issue we were given. And also throw in a few random thoughts and ideas and questions that were stirred up for me in relation to my own practice and the issues that I kind of wrangle with as a dance artist and as somebody making work. One of the things I wanted to echo is like for us to take a moment to sort of reflect on who's in the room and who isn't in the room, and just kind of as a being in the audience so far and just reflecting and noticing who isn't here has been quite a significant thing for me to consider. And sadly, that's not really something that I wasn't anticipating, but at the same time, I don't want to make assumptions, and I don't know who people are representing here. So, I think that's just an important thing to notice, and it's fantastic also who is here. But I was going to show I had this idea, I was going to show a video made by a group of people with learning disabilities that I do a lot of work with, and had there been more time, I might have done that, but I'm glad to have taken note that people from different sectors of the disability culture have been mentioned so far today. Anyway, I will begin by talking a little bit about my background. It feels kind of relevant. So, growing up, I never imagined I would become a dancer, which says something about my idea of what a dancer looks like, and I guess a lot of what a lot of other people think a dancer looks like. And I always loved dancing, and I used to make up dance routines in my bedroom, and as I grew up I would go clubbing every weekend, and never ever considered it as an option for anything beyond that though. And my training is actually in the arts therapist, which sort of feels a little bit of a swear word in some ways, talking about disability therapy, but that's not what I do anymore. But I practice as a visual artist, and that was what my background is in. And then about 14 years ago, I felt it necessary to begin an investigation into the issues my body presents me with, both from a personal perspective and in relation to the wider culture, in response to people's attitudes towards me and other bodies that are signified as different in some way. So I experience pain and have urges to move in ways that are impossible for my body. So to a degree, these experiences are what drive and fuel my work. And when I began, it was still not with a view to performing, it was a research process, or so I thought. And I developed my practice by being fortunate enough to work mostly individually with people working in dance, choreography, and body-based methods. And back then, the thought of going to a dance class never even crossed my mind until a few years ago, because I assumed I wouldn't be able to access the movement, that I wouldn't be able to do it the way everyone else did. And that's actually since become a central element within my work, and I've been going to standard dance classes and contemporary dance classes, and that's something that has really become integral. And the value and significance of presenting the outcome of the research as dance, it sort of just evolved along the way really, but now that's absolutely sort of crucial, or it certainly is at the moment. And in some ways I feel that my reasons for making work and performance are different to most people who work in dance, in that I didn't set out to become a dancer, it's not something that I dreamt of doing. It's obviously a huge generalisation and an assumption, but I wonder how many parallels and similarities and differences there are between my journey to and experience of accessing dance and that of other disabled dance artists. So what I'm essentially pointing out here is the exclusivity of dance, and we've heard people mention the word exclusive already today, and it's a reflection of the wider culture of how dancers' bodies and bodies in general are are portrayed. And as I hinted at earlier, it's like, does the symposium itself have an exclusiveness about it? That's one of my questions. And I'm not an academic, and I've been asked to speak from the perspective of being a dance artist with 12 years of experience. And the topic of the panel is about critical discourse, which is an academic term. So when I started looking at the topic, I looked up the definition of critical discourse, which I guess is where a lot of people start when they're preparing presentations. And I unpicked the question of, is there an assumption that there isn't a language to discuss dance made and performed by disabled artists? It sort of feels that, just from what Karen was just saying, that is kind of what is being said here today. And is it necessary for there to be a different language for dance made by disabled artists? And if so, does this separate it and question the value of it compared to dance made by non-disabled artists? Or does it acknowledge the particularity of it? Is it akin to saying, oh, but I don't think of you as being disabled, which a lot of disabled people get, I think, from my experience and from my friends' experience, and that's a huge non-acknowledgement of someone's experience and identity. But then if the work being made is not directly focused on issues of disability, and the main issue that gets talked about is the way the body is signified, the artistic integrity of the work may also feel unacknowledged. So these are things that I constantly wrangle with for myself. So regarding the panel title, which is about the lack of critical discourse, I want to question whether the lack is relative to the amount of critical discourse that's available to discuss dance made by non-disabled dance artists. And if so, is this in a broader sense also a reflection of the dominant ideal of the non-disabled body on the dance stage, and how disabled dancers are largely called upon to perform the prevailing ideals of elegance and capacity? So, I've been thinking a lot about what does critical discourse mean to me individually, and what's my experience of it. And I've gathered quite a lot of experience of it over the years from just the work that I've done, but not through placing myself within the academy particularly, only as a visitor. But if a conversation takes place about dance outside of an academic context, is that critical discourse? Because I spend loads of my time talking about about dance made by disabled artists and dance made by non-disabled artists. So does it count as critical discourse if it happens down the pub or in a cafe or wherever? And I wanted to mention a bit about language, because it's something that obviously comes up again and again and again when we're talking about anything to do with disabled bodies and disability. And I was thinking a lot about the very terms exclusive and inclusive, and it's it could be a whole symposium really, but in terms of writing about and talking about dance including disabled people, terms like integrated and inclusive and mixed ability obviously all have an influence on how people perceive the work and the bodies involved. And I was really interested in the story Colette talked about earlier about people not knowing that the cast of the show was made up of disabled people, and what that did to the work and people's response to it. So thinking about framing of the work, is it always useful or necessary to describe work by disabled artists as being made by disabled artists? If the body isn't mentioned, what does this do to the work? And it can, for me, at times, it can connect with a reductionist approach to my body if I frame my work as being made by disabled dance artists, and I come up with lots of different ways of describing my physicality and as a way to sort of provoke people's ideas about what disability actually means. And the whole reductionist approach and other disabled bodies and conspicuousness in daily life, it reduces the experiences to something medical or physical and can overshadow what goes on in terms of accessing dance. And the barriers for me are actually more around issues of conspicuousness. And I'm interested in, you know, whether being described as disabled can feel like a trap that's created by institutions, funding bodies and so forth, because there's no access, but then you only get access through the identity, but then you get trapped within the identity in order to continue to have access. So there's, although it can be a really positive thing, and it's about like identity politics on a broader level in terms of how one defines oneself and what sort of community one identifies with, but within performance, and especially within dance made by disabled artists, there's obviously something that I find really problematic, and it's something that I really struggle with for myself anyway. And thinking about context and framing, this brings me to audience as well, and so what sort of audience is work being pitched at, and you know, it might be an obvious thing to say, but when we think about audience, the first person we really need to look at is ourselves. And, you know, just think about where you are each at right now. How is your current state affecting your ability to engage in this conversation, in this presentation? And how is your mood and your background and your experience and awareness influencing how you're receiving the information that's being brought to you today? I had a conversation with somebody recently about passive and active watching, and can it ever be truly passive? I don't know. But I've been editing my notes along the way. So. And there's this idea as well of if you're describing work as being made by disabled artists, do the audience have particular expectations? And there's, you know, obviously ideas about being a spectacle